My name is Clara Morgan. I'm 29, and until a week ago, I thought I understood love. I thought I knew the rules of trust, compromise, and patience. I'd built a life with Jacob Adams, my boyfriend of 3 years, our sunlit Seattle apartment, shared routines, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee mugs that had faded from years of washing. I loved him deeply, but lately, love had begun to feel like a weight pressing on my chest. Jacob had always been charming, witty, and, at times, infuriating. But over the last year, his dismissiveness had grown sharper, subtler. He rolled his eyes when I spoke, interrupted mid-sentence, and sometimes, in front of friends, would mock my opinions without even a hint of concern. I had told myself these were minor annoyances. After all, nobody is perfect. But beneath the laughter and the teasing, a quiet storm was brewing, and I was standing directly in its path. 2 weeks ago, that storm finally hit. We were sitting in our kitchen, rain streaking the windows, coffee cooling in our mugs. I tried to speak calmly, carefully. "Jacob, about Megan," I began. Megan, his ex-girlfriend, still lingering like a shadow over our relationship. I feel uncomfortable with how often you talk to her late at night. The jokes, the inside messages, it hurts. Jacob looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Clara, you're serious? Megan, she's my past. She's harmless. Why are you making this into whatever this is?" He leaned back, smirking. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said softly. I need some boundaries." He laughed. Not a kind laugh, not even a teasing laugh. One of those laughs that cuts deeper than any insult. "Boundaries. You think you're setting boundaries with me? Look at you. You're worried about Megan because, what? You're jealous? You code for a living. You spend Fridays playing board games. You're harmless. You're a puppy." A puppy. I froze. The word reverberated in the small kitchen like a mocking bell. "Woof, woof," he continued, patting my shoulder like I was a child. "See? The puppy's upset. Maybe go hide in your little office and calm down." I stared at him, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. The man I loved, the one I had trusted with my life, was laughing at my feelings. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. Love without respect is just a cage. I said nothing. Instead, I went to our bedroom, packed a small bag. Not in a rage, not to punish him, but to protect myself. By the time he came looking for me, I was already halfway through my plan. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Jacob, I need time away. Please respect my space. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Clara." No confrontation, no argument, just the calm certainty that I deserved peace. I drove to a cabin 3 states away belonging to my friend Keith, who had agreed weeks ago that I could stay there if I ever needed to step back. The road blurred beneath my tires, rain tapping a rhythm against the windshield, each drop a small punctuation in the story I was rewriting, my story. By the time I arrived, my phone was silent. I had changed numbers, blocked social media, and deactivated email accounts. The silence felt like liberation. Jacob's world would implode around assumptions, fear, and confusion, and I would remain calm, prepared, untouchable. And I knew, deep down, he would try. He always tried. But I had a head start. I had always been underestimated, always labeled the soft one, the puppy. But puppies, as I was about to prove, can bite when cornered. For the first time in months, I felt light. I could breathe. And yet, beneath the calm, a storm of guilt and anticipation churned. How long would it take before Jacob realized I wasn't coming back the way he expected? How far would he go before he recognized that I wasn't helpless? As I unpacked my bag in the quiet cabin, I let the rain outside mirror my thoughts. Cleansing, relentless, unstoppable. I thought of him laughing, calling me a puppy, and a quiet, determined smile crossed my face. The game had changed, and I was ready. By the time Clara Morgan's tires crunched onto the gravel driveway of Keith's cabin, she felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the distant mountains were shrouded in mist, a perfect shield for the storm she had left behind in Seattle. Jacob Adams would search, panic, nag, try to control, but for now, Clara was untouchable. The first step had been simple: disappear. She had blocked his number, deactivated social media, and changed her email addresses. Every breadcrumb that might have led him to her was erased before he even realized she was gone. Her friends, The ones she trusted knew only that she needed space. Nobody else would know where she was. Inside the cabin, Clara unpacked methodically. She arranged her clothes neatly, set her laptop on the small desk, and poured herself a cup of tea. Every detail mattered. She wasn't fleeing, she was reclaiming her agency. From the outside, Jacob's world began to crumble. Clara had anticipated the texts, the missed calls, the frantic voicemails from his friends. Through updates relayed by Keith and her other close contacts, she watched Jacob's panic unfold like a slow-motion film. He called her parents, asking for information. He reached out to her friends, hoping for a clue. Each time, Clara remained a ghost in the background, untouched, watching, learning. She allowed herself a small, ironic smile. He thought she was vulnerable. He thought she would come running if he turned the right key. But the truth was the opposite. Her absence wasn't abandonment. It was strategy. Her calm, collected exit was a demonstration of strength he hadn't anticipated. The nights were quiet in the cabin, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Clara used this silence to reflect, to process, and to plan for what would come next. She knew Jacob wouldn't stop. He had a history of entitlement and obsession, and Megan, his ex-girlfriend, remained a lingering element in his insecurity. Clara steeled herself. Patience and preparation were her allies now. Day 2 brought the first indirect update. Keith texted, "Jacob called me 3 times in an hour. Sounds like he's losing it. Don't respond. Just focus on yourself." Clara's chest tightened, not out of fear, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Jacob was frantic. He was reacting, not thinking. And that was exactly what she needed. She spent her days unpacking her emotions alongside her belongings. Every detail in the cabin, books on the shelves, photographs, even the pattern of her sheets, was a reclamation of her life. This was not exile, it was empowerment. She allowed herself a moment of indulgence, sitting by the fireplace with the rain streaking the windows, thinking about the person she had been and the person she was becoming. By nightfall, her phone remained silent, a deliberate and powerful barrier. She reminded herself that each missed call was a victory. Each unanswered text was a statement. She was no longer someone to be mocked, underestimated, or controlled. Jacob had labeled her a puppy, soft, harmless. But puppies, she had learned, could bite when cornered. Keith's cabin became her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe without the weight of belittlement pressing down. She cooked her meals in silence, read books she had been putting off, and journaled late into the night. Every action was purposeful, building the narrative of a woman reclaiming herself. As the days passed, updates trickled in. Jacob had begun calling her workplace, asking mutual friends for information. Clara remained calm, narrating the events with an almost cinematic detachment in her mind. The panic, the confusion, the frantic search, everything unfolding according to the plan she had quietly laid weeks before. Her thoughts often wandered to Megan. She didn't hate her. She understood that Megan had been a part of Jacob's past. But she did understand one thing clearly. Jacob's insecurities and his inability to respect boundaries were her responsibility to navigate now. And she was navigating them brilliantly. By the end of the first week, Clara felt a shift inside her. Fear had been replaced with clarity, and anxiety had been replaced with a quiet, unwavering sense of control. She could see Jacob's desperation from afar, like watching a man flail in slow motion, and it gave her perspective. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't fragile. She was calculated, prepared, and, most importantly, free. As rain lashed against the cabin windows, Clara poured herself another cup of tea and let the quiet wash over her. Each drop of water mirrored her own cleansing, a reminder that leaving had not been surrender, it had been strategy. The storm outside mirrored the one she had escaped, but inside she was calm, untouchable, and ready for the next move. The game had changed. Jacob thought he knew her. He thought he could control her. He was about to learn that Clara Morgan was not a puppy, and that her silence could be as sharp as any bark. Clara Morgan had expected Jacob Adams to be persistent. She had anticipated worry, calls, and frantic messages, but persistence was just the beginning. By the second week of her absence, Jacob's desperation had begun to take darker, more invasive forms. It started with the private investigator, Clara learned through a friend that someone had been asking odd questions about her employment, pretending to be a potential client. The PI was sloppy, enough for her to immediately recognize the ruse. She smiled, a cold satisfaction in her chest. He had assumed he could track her down, but he had underestimated the careful planning that had gone into every detail of her disappearance. Jacob's calls to her friends and family intensified. He reached out to her parents, to her colleagues, and even to mutual acquaintances. Each attempt to locate her was met with firm, pre-prepared responses. Clara watched it unfold from the cabin like a scene in a suspense film. Every frantic email and call carefully documented by her network, every misstep of Jacob's magnified in her mind. Megan's name floated like smoke in every conversation she heard indirectly. Jacob's insecurities were laid bare. Clara understood the dynamics. Megan was no threat, but Jacob's inability to respect boundaries and let go was the real problem. Watching him unravel, she felt a complex mixture of pity and resolve. She had once been patient, forgiving, and loving, but never again would she allow her life to be controlled by someone else's entitlement. The emotional tension escalated when Jacob attempted to contact her workplace. Clara had prepared for this. Every arrangement she had made allowed her to appear completely unreachable. She had informed HR and key colleagues that she was on an extended personal sabbatical, no details provided. Each failed attempt to reach her only fueled Jacob's obsession. Through Keith and mutual friends, she received snippets of his increasingly erratic behavior, text messages that alternated between pleading and threatening, voicemails that vacillated between despair and entitlement. Clara analyzed them quietly, like an outsider, noting patterns, predicting moves. Each escalation only confirmed her decision. Leaving had been necessary, and strategic calm was the only way to protect herself. There were nights when she allowed herself a moment to reflect on their past, and on Jacob's ex, Megan. Megan was harmless, yes, but her presence in Jacob's memories had magnified his insecurities. Clara realized that she had spent too much time compromising, too much time softening herself to fit his comfort. Now, from the safety of the cabin, she could see it clearly. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, but she was not powerless. One evening, as rain fell relentlessly on the cabin roof, Clara received an indirect update. Jacob tried contacting your parents again. He's convinced you're in danger. She smiled wryly. Danger? If anything, the danger had always been to her. The danger of being trapped in a relationship where her voice was ignored, her boundaries mocked, and her worth minimized. She had escaped, not out of fear, but out of foresight. Jacob, like many who are used to control, could not handle her absence. Every failed attempt at connection, every unanswered message only intensified his obsession. He began to seek information from sources he had no right to contact. He overstepped, breached etiquette, ignored warnings. Each misstep played directly into Clara's carefully constructed plan. Clara's nights were quiet, contemplative. She would sit by the window, watching the rain blur the trees into indistinct shapes, thinking about the man she once loved. The irony wasn't lost on her. He had mocked her as a puppy, labeled her harmless. Yet here she was, unseen, untouchable, plotting nothing more than her own calm survival. By the end of the second week, Clara had become almost ghost-like. Every move Jacob made to locate or provoke her failed spectacularly. The private investigator, the frantic calls, even the subtle manipulations, all were nullified by her careful preparation. Jacob's frustration was palpable even from a distance, and Clara felt a quiet, almost cinematic thrill at seeing him cornered by his own impatience. Still, she did not gloat. There was no pleasure in watching a person unravel. There was only clarity. The power of her plan was not in his humiliation. It was in her freedom. She had reclaimed her life, step by step, and each calculated move reinforced a simple truth. She was neither weak nor soft. Megan, Jacob's ex, remained a minor shadow in this story, a reminder of the past, but irrelevant to the present. Clara had learned to separate fear from reality, to recognize where real threats lay. And the real threat had never been Megan. It had been Jacob's inability to respect boundaries. The storm outside mirrored the one she had escaped in Seattle. Rain lashed against the cabin windows, wind shook the eaves, and Clara sat in quiet contemplation, sipping tea, her mind as sharp and steady as the storm was wild. She had changed the game, and Jacob was playing without knowing the rules. The quiet of the cabin became her armor. Each message she ignored, each phone call she allowed to go unanswered, each failed attempt Jacob made to control her reinforced a truth that was both terrifying and liberating. She was no longer the puppy he had mocked. She was prepared, untouchable, and ready for whatever came next. Laura Morgan had expected persistence from Jacob Adams, but she hadn't fully anticipated the escalation into desperation and entitlement. By the third week of her disappearance, his attempts to control her life had grown reckless. Calls to her family, messages to her workplace, even reaching out to acquaintances who had no right to intervene. Every move was a mistake, and every mistake played directly into Clara's hands. She had prepared meticulously. Her personal accounts were secured, her apartment in Seattle was protected, and her absence framed as a planned sabbatical to anyone asking. She wasn't hiding out of fear. She was protecting herself. The distinction mattered, and she held on to it firmly. The first wave of consequences came when Jacob tried to access her home. He had assumed, as so many men in his position do, that control over property meant control over her. He attempted to hire a locksmith, claiming he had the right to change locks. The response was swift. Her name was on the deed. His was not. Legal authority denied. Then came the utilities and streaming services. Again, he tried to manipulate, to exert influence over a space he no longer had any control over. And again, Clara was ready. Every account was secured. Every password changed. Every failed attempt only heightened the tension, and for Clara, reinforced the justice of her decision to leave. Jacob's obsession grew. Private investigators, calls, attempts to verify her location through her workplace, all failed. Clara's calm, deliberate planning had made her untouchable. She received updates indirectly, snippets from friends and family. He called your parents again. He's convinced something is wrong. Tried to reach your office. HR says you're on leave. Even the PI seems frustrated. He can't find you anywhere. Through it all, Clara remained composed. There was no gloating, no petty satisfaction. Instead, she reflected quietly on the lessons of patience and preparation. The real threat had never been Megan, Jacob's ex-girlfriend, nor the outside world. It had been the violations of trust and respect she had endured in her own home. Then Jacob escalated further, moving toward legal and financial measures. He attempted to claim control over her accounts, to question her mental fitness, and even sought advice on asserting authority over her property. Each attempt was met with calm, methodical countermeasures. Police welfare checks confirmed she was safe. Lawyers dismissed baseless claims. Fraud alerts, triggered on her accounts, forced him into failure. Each escalation only cemented her position. She had done nothing illegal, nothing rash. She had protected herself. Clara's internal monologue during these events was quiet but piercing. She felt no triumph in his desperation, only clarity and empowerment. Every action he took against her reflected his own flaws, not her vulnerability. Megan appeared briefly in this period, contacted by Jacob in desperation, trying to serve as a go-between or pawn. Clara knew better. Megan was a minor shadow in this unfolding drama. The real challenge was Jacob himself and his inability to respect boundaries. Clara also had to contend with the emotional strain of being erased from her own life. Every blocked message, every unanswered call, every attempted intrusion could have felt like isolation. Instead, it became a reinforcement of autonomy. She slept peacefully in the cabin, cooked her meals, and watched the rain streak the forest outside, each droplet a reminder of freedom reclaimed. Then came the turning point, Jacob's attempts at fraud. He tried to access her accounts using old passwords, security questions, and even subtle manipulations that bordered on criminal. Her careful preparation triggered alerts, freezing access, and alerting authorities. For the first time, Clara realized that his obsession could land him in real trouble. She didn't celebrate. She didn't revel in punishment. Instead, she quietly documented every interaction, every attempt at intrusion, every escalation, proof for herself and for the inevitable resolution. Each incident strengthened her resolve. She had acted out of necessity, not anger, and the consequences Jacob was facing were the natural result of his own choices. By the end of this stage, Clara's life had become almost cinematic in contrast to the chaos Jacob was creating. Rain streaked the cabin windows, the fireplace crackled softly, and her life moved forward, step by step, while Jacob spun in spirals of frustration, entitlement, and obsession. She had learned a critical truth. Strength is quiet, preparation is decisive, and boundaries are non-negotiable. Clara Morgan, once labeled a puppy, had become untouchable, not through aggression, but through strategy, foresight, and self-respect. Jacob Adams's world was unraveling, and she could watch safely, knowing she had acted not out of vengeance, but out of self-preservation. Her calm and deliberate choices set the stage for the final reckoning, a confrontation not of fists or fury, but of consequences, justice, and personal empowerment. The game had changed entirely, and Clara was ready for the conclusion. By the fourth week of her absence, Clara Morgan had settled into a rhythm of quiet vigilance. Her days at Keith's cabin were still, introspective, almost cinematic. She walked the trails surrounding the cabin, watched the rain bend the trees, and sipped tea by the fireplace, cataloging every lesson learned from the past months. But she knew the climax of this story was approaching. Jacob Adams's desperation had escalated to a level where consequences were inevitable, not because she sought them, but because his actions had created them. It began with attempted account breaches. Jacob had tried to access Clara's bank, her subscriptions, even her personal records using old passwords he assumed she still used. Fraud alerts triggered immediately, freezing access and alerting authorities. Federal investigators contacted him, warning him that repeated attempts to access someone else's accounts was a federal offense. For Jacob, the realization hit like lightning. His obsession had crossed a line. Clara remained calm. She had documented everything: the phone logs, the messages, the failed attempts. Every escalation, every irrational act of control had been preserved, not for revenge, but as a shield and record of truth. She allowed the authorities to do their work from afar, never intervening directly. Watching justice unfold without her fingerprints felt strangely empowering. Meanwhile, Jacob tried to manipulate her physical space. Her apartment in Seattle remained untouched, secured under her name alone. Attempts to change locks, transfer utilities, or assert authority were denied. Even a locksmith refused service without proper legal documentation. Every failed attempt widened the chasm between what Jacob assumed he could control and what he actually could. Social media became another battlefield. Jacob, frustrated and humiliated, posted online, spreading misinformation about Clara, painting her as manipulative, unstable, and elusive. Clara, ever meticulous, countered not with drama, but with documentation, screenshots, legal notices, police confirmations, and factual records. Her truth became indisputable, leaving Jacob's fabrications crumbling in the eyes of friends, colleagues, and anyone who took a moment to see the evidence. The final escalation came from Jacob's professional and personal reputation. His harassment, online defamation, and attempted fraud were documented and traceable. Employers, mutual contacts, and even acquaintances who had been unwittingly involved saw the reality. Jacob's behavior was the problem, not Clara's absence. Clara's life, her safety, and her reputation remained intact. His unraveling was now undeniable. Throughout all this, Megan, Jacob's ex, remained peripheral, a shadow of the past, never a threat, never a participant in Clara's reclamation of her autonomy. Jacob's focus on Megan only highlighted his obsession and his inability to respect boundaries. Clara saw it clearly. The only person who had truly endangered her peace had been him. Weeks after her disappearance, Clara returned to Seattle. She walked into her apartment calmly, the lock secure, the home untouched, the space hers alone. Jacob was no longer a looming presence, but a lesson etched in her memory. She could finally breathe in her own space, reclaiming every small detail of her life that had once been overshadowed by mockery, belittlement, and control. In the end, Clara realized the true victory was not in punishing Jacob. It was in reclaiming herself. She had proven, first to herself and then indirectly to him, that respect, boundaries, and self-preservation were non-negotiable. The storm of harassment, obsession, and entitlement that Jacob had unleashed was neutralized not through confrontation, but through meticulous planning, patience, and unwavering resolve. Clara Morgan had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. She had turned the tables without losing her dignity. The man who once mocked her as a puppy had learned the hard truth. Underestimated people often hold the most power, and sometimes the quietest ones are the ones who bite the hardest. Life returned to normal gradually. She rebuilt routines, reconnected with friends, and even allowed herself the tentative steps of new relationships, this time with men who respected boundaries and treated her as an equal. Jacob Adams faded into the background, a cautionary memory, a lesson in the cost of disrespect and obsession. Clara never gloated, never flaunted her triumph. The point was not humiliation, but empowerment. The lesson was clear. Strength is calm, preparation is decisive, and boundaries are absolute. Anyone who disrespects them is only accountable for the consequences of their own choices. And as Clara looked out the window of her Seattle apartment, rain streaking softly across the glass, she whispered quietly to herself, a private affirmation, a symbol of everything she had endured and overcome. I am not a puppy. I am Clara Morgan, and I am free.